If you're going to fail the Part 107, this is probably where it happens. Not the regulations, the chart. Roughly 40% of the questions on the exam put a piece of a sectional chart or a weather report or an airport diagram in front of you and ask one specific thing about it. People walk in having memorized the rules, they hit the chart questions, and they freeze because a sectional looks like somebody spilled a box of symbols on a map. Here's the reframe that fixes it. You are never reading the whole map. You are reading two things in the same order every single time. In the next 20-some minutes, I'm going to give you that two-step routine. Walk every color and line and symbol you'll be tested on. Show you the exact trap that fools most people, and even fools a lot of study courses. And then we'll read 10 real chart excerpts out loud together until it feels automatic. By the end, the chart stops being scary. Let's go. Here's the whole skill in 2 steps. First, read the texture. Is it a crisp line or a fuzzy band? A crisp line is a class boundary that reaches the ground. A fuzzy band is a floor sitting up high. Second, read the color, blue or magenta. Those 2 answers name any airspace on the chart. Say it as a rule, line equals class, fuzz equals floor. Color alone is a trap. Blue names 3 airspaces and magenta names 3. So texture always comes first. We're going to run every symbol in this video through that exact 2-step read. It's boring. Boring is what passes. Start with the airport dot because its color tells you one specific thing, whether the field has a control tower. A blue dot is towered. A magenta dot is not. That's all the dot color is. The tower, nothing more. Now here's the catch the exam loves. The dot's color is separate from the color of the airspace lines drawn around it. They happen to agree for Class B and Class D, a blue towered field inside blue airspace. But Class C is the exception, a blue towered dot sitting inside magenta rings. So the saying magenta means non-towered is true of the dot, and it is never a rule for the airspace itself. Read the dot for the tower, then read the line, coming up next, for the class. Before we walk the classes one at a time, here's the whole system on one screen because it's much smaller than it looks. Every airspace boundary the exam can show you is one of just 6 looks. 3 line textures, a solid line, a dashed line, or a soft faded band, times 2 colors, blue and magenta, 3 times 2, 6 cells. That's the entire alphabet soup, right there. And there's a trick that fills in 4 of those cells for free. Go down the alphabet, B, C, D, E, and the color simply alternates while the line softens. Blue, magenta, blue, magenta. Class B is solid blue. Class C is solid magenta. Class D is dashed blue. Class E to the surface is dashed magenta. Blue, magenta, blue, magenta. Solid, solid, dashed, dashed. Say it once and you own the 4 hardest cells. The last 2 cells are the faded bands. Those are Class E floors, not classes. And we'll hang a second little trick on them in a few minutes. For now, picture 6 mailboxes. Everything in the next 10 minutes just drops into one of them. So instead of memorizing a pile of unrelated symbols, you're just learning which mailbox each one goes in. The busiest airports in the country, the big airline hubs, sit under Class B airspace, and Class B is drawn with solid blue lines. Picture an upside-down wedding cake, a small ring at the surface right over the airport, then wider and wider shelves stacked on top as you go up and out. Each ring carries a fraction, a number over a number, and that fraction is the ceiling over the floor of that shelf, written in hundreds of feet, MSL. So 100 over 40 means the shelf goes from 4,000 feet up to 10,000 feet, both above sea level. Here's why the floor matters to you as a drone pilot. Under the outer shelves, The Class B airspace doesn't reach the ground. Its floor might be 3,000 or 4,000 feet up, and below that floor, you're in different lower airspace. So the number you usually care about is the bottom number. The exam trap on Class B is the units. Those fractions are always MSL, never AGL. So don't compare them to your 400-foot limit, which is AGL. And remember the color contrast we're building. Class B is solid blue. In 2 minutes, you'll meet solid magenta, and they are absolutely not the same class. Class C surrounds busy but not mega airports, and it's drawn as a solid magenta ring. The usual shape, a core that's about a 5 nautical mile radius from the surface up to roughly 4,000 feet above the airport, then a shelf out to about 10 miles that starts partway up, and beyond that, an outer area, normally out to about a 20-mile radius, where air traffic control can provide services even though that outer ring isn't drawn on the chart. To operate in Class C, you need two-way radio communication established with ATC. Now here is the single most important sentence in this entire video, so I'm going to slow down. A solid magenta line is Class C. Not everything magenta is Class C. In a few minutes, you'll see a soft, faded, fuzzy magenta band, and that faded band means something completely different. It's a Class E floor, not Class C. Same color, totally different meaning, and the difference is entirely in whether it's a crisp solid line or a soft shaded area. Crisp solid magenta line, Class C. Fuzzy magenta shading, Class E floor. If you remember one thing from today, remember that the texture of the magenta changes the answer. Class D wraps a single towered airport that isn't busy enough for B or C, and it's drawn as a dashed blue ring, segmented, like a blue dotted line around the field. It typically extends up to a couple thousand feet above the airport. The ceiling is printed right there in a small dashed box, and it's given in hundreds of feet MSL. So a box that reads 40 means a ceiling of 4,000 feet above sea level. Class D is towered, so it's controlled. You'd need authorization to operate there. The clean way to remember the two dashed rings you'll meet: dashed blue is Class D, blue because there's a tower, and dashed magenta, coming up next, is Class E to the surface, magenta because there's no tower. Dashed blue, towered, small, ceiling in a box. Simple. Now the one that gets everybody, so we're going to take it slowly. Class E is controlled airspace, but it's the flexible kind. It fills in the gaps above and around everything else, and the chart shows it 3 different ways depending on where its floor sits. Way number 1, a dashed magenta ring around an airport. That means Class E starts right at the surface, usually at a non-towered field that has instrument approaches and needs controlled airspace all the way to the ground. Dashed magenta ring, Class E to the surface. Way number 2, a soft, faded, fuzzy magenta band, a vignette. On the faded side of that band, the floor of Class E drops down to 700 feet above the ground. Way number 3, a soft, faded, fuzzy blue band. On its faded side, the Class E floor is 1,200 feet above the ground. So magenta shading, 700, blue shading, 1,200. Here's the trick to keep those two straight. Think temperature. The warm color, magenta, sits low at 700. The cool color, blue, sits high at 1,200. Warm low, cool high. Here's why the two floors sit where they do. Class E protects planes flying in cloud. Over open country, they're just cruising high, so the floor only comes down to 1,200 feet, faded blue. But near an airport where planes descend through cloud to land, it's pulled down to 700, faded magenta, to protect them longer. So faded magenta is also a flag. Manned traffic may be descending nearby. Eyes up. Now here is the trap, spelled out, because this is the exact error that has shipped in real study material. A solid magenta line is Class C. A faded magenta area is Class E with a 700-foot floor. Same color. The only difference is solid crisp line versus soft fuzzy shading, and that difference flips the answer from Class C to Class E. So whenever you see magenta, your very first question is not what color is it? You already know it's magenta. Your first question is this a hard line or a soft shaded area? Hard line, it's a class boundary. Class C if solid. Class E to surface if dashed. Soft shading, it's a floor. 700 AGL. Say it out loud. Solid is a class, fuzzy is a floor. Below whichever Class E floor applies, right down near the ground, is Class G. And that's where a lot of your legal drone flying actually happens. Let's talk about the airspace nobody draws a line for. Class G, uncontrolled. Class G is the air near the ground, underneath the Class E floor. Out in the countryside, where that Class E floor is up at 700 or 1200 feet. Everything below it is Class G. And since you're flying at or under 400 feet, a huge amount of ordinary drone flying happens in Class G, where you don't need ATC authorization. You still follow all the Part 107 rules, but there's no tower to call. First, how to read a shelf fraction, because it trips people up. When you see a fraction on a ring, say 110/40, read it as one layer of the cake seen from above, the top of that layer over its own floor, both in feet above sea level. So 110/40 is a top of 11,000 and a floor of 4,000 MSL. It's not two separate shelves. It's one shelf's ceiling and floor. The maximum elevation figure, that big faded number in the middle of each grid square that shows the highest terrain or obstacle in that square. MSL. Almost every number on a chart is MSL, feet above sea level, because your altimeter and the chart both speak it. Only three things are AGL, the two faded Class E floors, 700 and 1200, the obstacle height in parentheses, and your own 400-foot limit. Everything else, shelves, tops, the Class D box, the MEF, is MSL. Here's the hook. Shelves and tops are sea level. Floors, parentheses, and my limit are ground. So every time you read a number, name the reference first before you compare it to anything. A handful of other symbols show up on the exam, so let's clear them fast. Obstacles. A tower is drawn as a little spike. If it has a lightning bolt style burst around the top, it's lighted. Read two numbers. The bold one is the top of the obstacle in MSL, and the number in parentheses just below it is how tall the obstacle is in AGL, above the ground at its base. Latitude and longitude. The lines running east and west are latitude, and they measure degrees north or south of the equator. The lines running north and south are longitude, measuring east or west of the prime meridian. The fine tick marks along those lines are 1 minute each, 60 minutes to a degree, and that's how the exam asks you to pin down or identify a point. Now frequencies, and here's the correction if you learned it the old way. The Common Traffic Advisory, frequency, the CTAF, the frequency you use to announce yourself at a non-towered field, is marked with a circled letter C, a C inside a circle, and the frequency is printed just to the left of that circle. A separate star symbol means the airport's control tower is only part-time. So, circled C is the CTAF. The star is part-time tower. Don't grab the star. And when you want the full, complete story on any airport, every runway, frequency, light, and remark that lives in the chart supplement, which is the most comprehensive single source there is. Special use airspace. A military operations area is outlined in a magenta hatched border. In an active MOA, you exercise extreme caution, and you check whether it's hot by NOTAM or with flight service. Restricted areas have a blue hatched border, and you need permission from the controlling agency to enter. And temporary flight restrictions, TFRs, won't be printed on your chart at all. You only find those in the NOTAMs you check right before you fly. Blue lines with a V and a number are Victor Airways, the low-altitude airway system that rarely touches your world, but does show up on the test. Before we read real charts, 3 traps that catch people who actually studied. Trap 1, and it's the single most tested trap on the whole chart. A dashed magenta ring is Class E to the surface. Controlled to the ground, authorization required. A fuzzy magenta band is a Class E floor up at 700. So at 400 feet, you're underneath it. In Class G, no authorization. Same color. Opposite answer. The only difference is line versus fuzz, which is exactly why you read texture first. Trap 2, MSL versus AGL. The question gives you an airspace floor or an obstacle top in MSL and a 400-foot limit in AGL and hopes you'll compare them directly. Name the reference on every number before you do any math. Trap 3, near identical answer choices. On chart questions, the FAA loves to offer 3 answers that differ by one small thing: the same runway with left versus right traffic, or the same altitude labeled MSL in one option and AGL in another. When 2 answers are almost twins, the difference between them is exactly what the question is testing. So slow down and find that one difference. Those 3, texture, reference, and the near twin, are where prepared people lose points. Watch for them in every read coming up. All right, 10 reads, same 2-step read every time. Texture first, is it a crisp line or a fuzzy band? Then color, blue or magenta. Name it, and only then reach for the floor, or the MSL versus AGL if the question needs it. Follow along and say the answer before I do. Read 1. Find the airport. It's the magenta field in the middle. Read the lines. A solid magenta ring around it. Solid magenta line. That's Class C. Floors and ceilings. Surface up to about 4,000 above the field in the core. MSL or AGL. Doesn't even come up here. The question is just the class. Answer, Class C. Notice I checked the texture first. Solid, so a class boundary, not a floor. Read 2. Find the airport. Blue, so it's towered. Read the lines. A dashed blue ring. Dashed blue is Class D, floors and ceilings. The little dashed box says 40. That's a ceiling of 4,000. MSL or AGL. Airspace ceilings are MSL, so 4,000 feet above sea level. Answer, Class D, ceiling 4,000 MSL. Read 3. Find the airport. The big blue hub. Read the lines. Solid blue, Class B. Floors and ceilings. This outer shelf reads 100 over 40. MSL or AGL. And here's the trap. That's MSL. So the floor of this shelf is 4,000 feet above sea level, ceiling 10,000. Under that shelf, below 4,000 MSL, you're not in Class B. Answer, Class B, floor 4,000 MSL. Read 4. Find the airport. Magenta, non-towered. Read the lines. A dashed magenta ring. Dashed magenta is Class E starting at the surface. Floors, surface. Why? Non-towered field, with instrument approaches that needs controlled airspace to the ground? Answer: Class E to the surface, and notice it's a dashed line, not a fuzzy band. Read 5, the money red. Find the point. Out in the country, no airport ring here, just a soft faded magenta band. Read the lines. It's not a line, it's fuzzy shading. So this is a floor, not a class boundary. Faded magenta means the Class E floor drops to 700 feet AGL on the faded side. Below that, down to the ground, is Class G, MSL or AGL. 700 is AGL. Answer: Class E floor at 700 AGL. And say it with me, this faded magenta is not the solid magenta Class C ring from Red 1. Red 6. Find it. A tall obstacle symbol with a burst on top, so it's lighted. Read the numbers. Bold 1250 on top, 300 in parentheses below. Split MSL from AGL. The bold 1250 is the top in MSL. The 300 in parentheses is how tall it stands, in AGL. So if the question asks the obstacle's height above the ground, it's 300 feet. If it asks the top elevation, it's 1,250 MSL. Same symbol, two different numbers. Pick the reference the question asked for. Read 7. No airport here. Just that big bold blue number sitting in the middle of a grid square. That's the maximum elevation figure, the highest terrain or obstacle anywhere in that quadrangle. You read the tall digits as thousands and hundreds, so here it's about 6,900 feet. MSL or AGL. The MEF is always MSL. Answer: the highest thing in that quadrant is roughly 6,900 feet above sea level. It's a terrain awareness number, and it's always MSL. Read 8. Find the airport. Magenta, non-towered, so we self-announce on the CTAF. Read the data block. Look for the circled C, the C inside a circle, and the frequency just to its left. That frequency is the CTAF. Careful, if there's a star, that's telling you the tower is part-time. It is not the CTAF marker. Answer: the frequency next to the circled C is the one you'd monitor and announce on. Read 9. The question gives coordinates and asks which point matches. Find your lines. Latitude runs east-west and measures north-south. Longitude runs north-south and measures east-west. Read the ticks. Each small tick is 1 minute, 60 to a degree. So count minutes up from the labeled degree line to land on the exact spot. MSL or AGL. Doesn't apply. This is position, not altitude. The whole skill here is just knowing a tick is a minute and which line is which. Read 10. Find the shape. A big area with a magenta hatched border and a name like a military operations area. Read it. In an active MOA, you use extreme caution, and you find out if it's active from a NOTAM or flight service. The chart alone won't tell you if it's hot right now. If that hatched border were blue, it'd be a restricted area, and you'd need permission from the controlling agency. And that thin blue line with a V and a number cutting across, that's a Victor airway, just a marked route. It's not something you need permission for. Answer: MOA, extreme caution when active. Check NOTAMs. 10 reads, 1 habit. Texture, then color, name it, then the floor, and MSL versus AGL when the question asks. Do that on the exam, and the chart questions turn into free points. Fast version, memorize this. The 2-step read, texture first. Is it a crisp line or a fuzzy band? Then color, blue or magenta. Line is a class, fuzz is a floor. Blue airport dot is towered, magenta is not. Now the 6 looks, 3 textures times 2 colors, and the trick that gives you 4 of them. B, C, D, E is blue, magenta, blue, magenta, and solid, solid, dashed, dashed. So solid blue is class B, solid magenta is class C, dashed blue is class D, dashed magenta is class E to the surface. Then the two faded floors, kept straight by temperature. Warm magenta is low, class E at 700 AGL. Cool blue is high, 1200 AGL. Below the class E floor near the ground is class G. Fractions, the MEF, and obstacle tops are MSL. Your 400 feet and the height in parentheses are AGL. The circled C is the CTAF. The star is a part-time tower, and the one that saves you the most points. A solid line is a class. Fuzzy shading is a floor. That's the whole skill. Now go drill it. The free sectional reader on DroneWorthy walks you through the 6 looks, the 2-step read, and go/no-go calls on real chart crops. No login. Pair it with the free sectional chart cheat sheet and the full chart reading practice set that explains every question, including why the wrong answers are wrong, at droneworthy.com. Read the texture, then the color, name the reference, and the sectional stops being the thing that fails you.